Hey, hello, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. I'm going to start with 10 minutes per game per side. Okay. Mostly, I had white. I played an accurate game. One blunder, no misses. One mistake and three inaccuracies. The blunder, though, if I can get back to the map, here it is. The blunder here about halfway through, a little bit before halfway through, looks like it was an extreme blunder. My opponent didn't pick up on it, and then the game continued along the lines that it would have anyway. So we're going to investigate that. Sometimes this could be like a computer find, that there's one single, twist and turn with every crane of the neck and nook and cranny of the mansion that makes it, 17 and a half moves divided by 1 over pi later. White could have picked up 2 pawns. I'm hurt, but sometimes this is true. Sometimes there are computer finds that really mate in 29. All right, so let's go over in detail here. Caro-Kann opening, and we this is the Caro-Kann opening. It's a very solid opening for black. And respond, it can be a move that adapts to many of white's options and aims to very often put a pawn on d5 with support from the c file. d5, c takes d, c takes d, e takes d, queen takes d, and then knight to c3 is part of white's point. We're going to develop with tempo, and my opponent chose queen to a5. The other options are queen to d8, and once in a while I've been seeing more recently queen to e5 check. White's own queen comes out to block, and it's a different game. So queen to a5, and we're going to push d4. We give this check with the bishop on c5 that is judged to be an inaccuracy, but we're really just getting our pieces out and laying forth the possibility that black will buckle under some of these attacks on black's queen side. The d pawn can get into the get into the deal here. If knight c6, for instance, and then there's a knight that's pinned to his king that can be attacked by a pawn. The queen gets into the act, sometimes by way of queen to a4, sometimes by way of queen to f3. So there's some of these things I think have been called corner tactics, and we're keeping those alive with bishop to b5 and just developing a bishop. My opponent is quiet and direct in return with bishop to d7. Not afraid of the queen trade with queen to a4, and there's really no threats, no strong threats on the right. If my opponent moves his knight on the king's side, I can capture his queen, but in terms of serious threats, they're either obvious or not really gonna happen. The obvious one would be black's got to do something about they queen, and she or they decide to capture on a4. Then with bishop then with bishop takes a4, it's this board is dry, bland. but neither side has an advantage. So I tend to do well in boards. Tend to do well on boards where there isn't much, wild or crazy tactics in play. A bishop takes a4. Okay, black wants to liquidate a bit, and like I said, this board is pretty darn dry. Our knights are getting developed. Pawn to e6 is the best move to make way for black's dark squared knight to develop. Any farther and he's losing a pawn. So we're playing some solid, straightforward moves here. And I made the mistake bishop to d2. I'm gonna have to consult my computer friends, the analysis for how come that's a mistake. To me, it looks pretty straightforward. Bishop d2, and then if the bishop swap, the king is no longer able to castle, but he's not in a horrible position. And if he were, then the knight would capture on d2 instead. But it looks like Torch 4 has something more interesting in store for us, as black's response could be bishop d2, and after king to d2, rook to d8. Looks like it applies just that extra point of pressure on white's isolated d4 pawn, and there's no way for white to defend the pawn. Is what I'm mostly looking at here. Let's do this against a computer. So after bishop takes d2, king takes d2, rook to d8. Now, this pawn is defended once and attacked twice. We got that. But are we really sure that king to c3 or king to e3 don't hold? These might hold the pawn. I'm thinking this as a player. I know ahead of time that both Torch 4 and Torch 4 playing as maximum have a, they're saying something's going on d4. I know that king c3 makes the knight difficult to retreat. It would be difficult for the knight to retreat, but the attacking pawn would have to skip over b6 and then we're allowing knight to c5 as a rescue. Right, so there we're hit with the fork between the king and the pawn on f2. And e3 is the better try at this. I'm wondering if I just don't capture here. It looks like my king's going to be scared off of any ability to protect the knight on d2, for either light-colored square to which the king may travel will be exposing white to knight takes f2 check, picking up the rook, or more likely the exchange, and d3 is bad because then we're also losing after pawn to e5, and this pawn will be both pinned and available to be captured. So perhaps, but king to e4 is no better, as knight takes f2 check. We maybe duck back to wherever we're gonna go, and we lose the exchange in the game. We're close. So let's play this out. What did we determine that e4 was better? Let's even take a hint. e4 is fine, but the computer likes d3, and I don't see right away why not play pawn to e5. And then when I scurry even further towards the queen's side, there's no fork maybe. So, alright, well, let's go with that. The fork's here. I scurry, and I've lost the exchange and a pawn. My opponent now has the material lead. These rooks are killer in the endgame. They're going to coordinate after castles or king to e7. And I have my 2 minor pieces, but knights in the endgame aren't, this isn't a big deal. This is not a bishop pair. And I have my lone rook. And I'm otherwise down not 1 but 2 pawns. So black will, with Grandmaster chess, black will close this down against white. All right, so that's not what happened. Instead, my opponent played pawn to b5, and I doubled back to c3, very willingly getting out of this mess on the corner here, putting my knight in a more central square where he can monitor potential incursions by black's f6 knight. Not only that, but when if he captures, say, on e4, he's helping with d2, as well as there are a number of pieces that can make sure that white's king remains safe. Knight takes b5. It's called an inaccuracy. I like it. It's a dynamic way to keep the d4 pawn protected and protected twice. You might consider after bishop takes d2, and then they have it for us. Knight takes d2, rook a to b8. I was thinking that just pop the old pawn to a6 in there, and white might have to retreat in some manner. And the exchange of bishops, I captured with the king, which is the correct way here. We can't lose sight of how important the d4 pawn is, both to defending against attacks along the d file and the material it's worth in and of itself. So it also helps, stifle some of black's otherwise or would-be mobility in and around and through the center. So this d4 pawn is very important in this position. Okay, I'm going to maybe overlook some of the more minor criticisms by Torch. Rook a c1. I think this was a great move for white to, push the knight around a bit. Rook a c8 was possible, I suppose. I just get this feeling like this knight is pretty darn loose, and if we can't attack him right away, not knight e5 because of the pin on the d pawn, but if we can't attack him right away, then at least it's a point of pressure. I like rook c6 here. My opponent took the more immediate or more natural response, which is also a good one. Knight to e7. Rook c7. Again, attacking the loose piece, but also getting on to the 7th rank, where if joined by a fellow rook, e-file is not going to do that very well here, but if joined by a fellow rook, say after doubling on the c-file, then maybe after doubling on the c-file, doubling on the 7th rank, and that could be gangbusters. The added threat to attacking the loose piece was picking up a pawn on a7. There's nothing wrong with that. The willingness to trade here, I wouldn't, frankly. As black, it's not necessarily that there's a wildly superior response, but maybe you want to start getting your own pawns. Black should get his/her their own pawns on the c-file doubled, or take a stab at the unprotected and loose piece on b5. It's not night and day. It's just that when you're behind in material, as black is to the tune of 2 pawns, you want to keep your pieces on the board. But so as a player, I was fine to see or happy to see rook takes a7, so I could play knight takes a7. As a coach, I would be saying, take a look at rook to b8 or rook to c8. These are all rook a to b8 or rook a to c8. The swap of rooks on a7. And black finds a way to cut through to attacking a2. Did I come up with something? Ah, yes. I came up with it. Came up with this resource. I found this resource. Rook to c1, and that's a bummer for my opponent because otherwise the game is gonna be drawn or close to it. The knight moves away, and black picks up a pawn here. White has to scramble to protect the b pawn. Then all of a sudden, black's knight from d5 is giving a check at b4 or something, something along those lines. Black's going to have an attack here. Sometimes we pick up a resource or notice a resource, rook to c1, because if capturing on b7, then rook to c8 is almost checkmate, and then knight must move to e8. Rook takes e8 is checkmate. So it delays black for just one tempo. There's one tempo, and black takes time out to play pawn to h6. My knight is still hanging for the moment. It's my move, I understand, but it's my move, I understand, but my knight is hanging. And I force this trade of rooks. So this is sort of like a resource on top of a resource. Once white has this trade of rooks, then the endgame is very favorable to white. 4 knights on the board, and white has 2 more pawns than black. The a pawn is going and motoring, and then maybe it's on its way somewhere here. Yeah, with pawn to a7, I could have played this better with more time. So let's give ourselves more time and a stronger opponent. There's the knight on d6 is just flat out en prie. Now I'm looking for ways to maybe box in black's knight. It doesn't seem so, because how am I going to control the b4 square? So instead, we'll calculate towards some kind of pawn grab on the king side. Knight at d to e4, and then if f5, can white play knight to f6 check? We're not really picking up any extra material there. And it's not clear that we're weakening black's pawn structure or not. And alternatively, we could offer a pawn trade on f3 or h3. I'm not exactly sure what that does for us. Look, white has a lot of extra material. There are probably more than one ways to go about this. Here we'll propose a trade of material versus a loss of a pawn. Trade of even material versus a loss of a pawn on c5, and that should get things going here. And my opponent moved the would-be trade while also attacking the vulnerable pawn. We'll just charge b4 here, charge up the board with b4. And then in the end, we get our pawn, but it's going to cost us this. That wasn't the way to do that. And we've got the extra piece now. All right. So this is, we're gonna. And that's how that would end. Long ways later. Yeah, that was fun though. And so back to the game. Made the blunder. Could have picked up the knight for free on e6. Right, he's on d6, but missed that. And we push forward with a more equal game. I have the well, not quite yet. I have the extra knight. I think I boggle that as well. Bundle, boggle, whatever it is. I had to take time at some point to sort of realize that around here, maybe a few moves earlier, a move or two later, I'm taking time to realize that, okay, I've messed up the win pretty badly in this game. That being said, look, I have 2 pawns to the better of my opponent. The board's almost clear, which helps to decide with the more pawns. With an active king, the knight is protecting one of my most valuable pawns in a way that if the king approaches and then captures, this pawn will be gone and queened most often before the knight can get there. In this case, the knight can get there to cover d8. But let's say the knight was, doing something, throwing a check on e1, from e1 to my king on f3, this pawn would be gone after the king captures on c3. So there's some stability built into my best trump on b5. The supporting part of that trump on c3. I have two. I have an extra pawn on the king side. This game isn't over yet. All right, Jordan. This is where we're gonna redouble our efforts and make sure to do our best to win, despite having messed up the free piece grab on d6, and another thing later on with one of, what was the other thing, and then a7. Oh, just because that misses the piece grab. So yeah, then just the piece grab on d6. You can learn this. When you play enough chess, you learn this. At points like these, you look at the board and say, I'm not just breezing through here, but the win is still totally there for white to demonstrate. King g5. So we're just trying to push our pawns forward and forward, make the king have to choose to go after one pawn or the other, because he, at this kind of distance between them, he probably can't choose to go after both successfully unless this knight, finds its way to a good square like d7. My opponent is trying his best to win one of these pawns for free. And so the idea with king to e6 is to attack the f6 pawn a second time. He's going to try to throw everything he has, everything he, she, or they have against the f6 pawn. Try to win it for free and then, reassess once that's done. I'm capturing my opponent's last pawn, so now I've assured a draw or better. And in the end, these pawns are almost perfectly placed to completely widen and therefore weaken black's defenses. We'll get to a position where we know going into pawn to f8 equals queen check that the knight will sacrifice himself and will be down to just kings and pawns, and my pawn is fast enough, quite fast enough, to make her way to promotion here as queen, and I have enough time to move on, and my opponent resigns. Great game, fun game. There are multiple points of interest. I think, for instance, this play to threaten the back rank mate, the blunder by playing a7 instead of capturing on d6, a bunch of other points. I don't know about a bunch of other, but there's maybe one or two other points that were really interesting. Neither my opponent nor I have any reason to hang our heads, and that's it. I think I'm going to be winding up this broadcast. Yeah. All right. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Have a great night.